Now on KATU News at 6, a political impasse. The Oregon Capitol Senate chambers empty on day 22 of a Republican walkout.
In a democracy, you show up, you do the work. You don't shut down government.
We took an oath of office to uphold the Constitution, and we're not going to violate that.
At issue, critical bills involving abortion and gun legislation. Democrats won't budge. Republicans won't yield.
I think the reason you're seeing this is because the art of compromise is, in my opinion, gone.
The people Oregon voters entrust with running the state in a partisan stalemate while the state's business stalls. When will lawmakers end the walkout and get back to work? KATU is live from the Oregon Capitol, asking the tough questions and holding your elected officials accountable. KATU News at 6, special coverage from Salem, starts now.
This is KATU News at 6, on your side.
You are taking a live look at the Oregon State Capitol right now as day 22 of a Republican-led walkout wraps up. Is there an end even near in sight? Thanks a lot for joining us for a very special edition of KATU News at 6, everybody. I'm Steve Dunn.
And I'm Mike Gaswin. We are live tonight from Salem as lawmakers continue to sit in gridlock. Several important pieces of legislation remain in limbo.
Over the next hour, a large part of our show will be focused on hearing from lawmakers on both sides of this walkout tonight, along with the statewide impact and likelihood of a resolution. Will it actually happen? Deb Knapp is also with us tonight, back at the KATU studio. Deb, back to you for now.
Well, Steve, tonight I'll be handling things here in the studio with experts about the similarities between the recent debt ceiling standoff in the nation's capital and the Oregon walkout. We'll also check in with some voters around the state for reaction to the Senate stalemate in Salem. But for now, let's go back out to our team at the Capitol who spoke with lawmakers today.
All right, Deborah, we'll talk to you very soon. Democrat Senator Rob Wagner is the Senate president. Obviously, his decisions carry a whole lot of weight. He will be instrumental in any deal happening between the Democrats and the Republicans. I sat down with Senator Wagner this afternoon. I wanted to hear from him the path forward. Here's a portion of our interview. Former Senate leaders Courtney and Bart Sugar, they were telling me they would speak on the phone several times a day during the walkouts to try and hammer out a deal. Is that happening with Senator Knopp at all?
Yeah, since the start of the legislative session, we've kept a very open door, trying to be as cordial as we possibly can. Every week we have a standing meeting, and unfortunately, for the last several weeks, Senator Knopp has canceled out on those. But we have other people that are talking, and you saw the governor engaged. We have multiple opportunities, and hopefully we can get those talks started again.
There's been some discussion of a suggestion to get everybody in a room. Get everybody and not let them leave until a deal is done. That's been done in the past.
Yeah.
Is that something you considered?
Yeah, I think it's worthy. Now, two things. One, I started my legislative service in 2018, so pretty much what I've known is walkouts. In 2019, I think the person you talked about getting everybody in a room, watched everybody walk out, even when there were people in the room, and then they walked out again, and then they walked out again in 2020. So there wasn't a lot of getting people in the room. There was just people shutting down government. I'm totally open to trying to get everybody in the room. In fact, with our office here, we worked on getting the speaker, the majority leaders, both minority leaders together. And we met for several days. And at the end of about 12 hours of negotiation, we were presented with a kill list. And ultimately, that was something that we really, in order to have honest negotiation, you need to know the terms of the debate. And we haven't really been presented with that yet.
Why not take the contentious issues you have now, table them for a later time, and then just deal with everything else you have?
Well, I think it's important to know that the voters vote on policies that they think are really, really important. So, for example, we started the legislative session with broadly bipartisan support. We got housing done, a giant jobs and semiconductor package, and the bills that are lined up for consideration on the floor are broadly bipartisan. Over 90% of the bills we pass out of here. But sometimes it means that you have difficult conversation in a democracy about things that you don't necessarily want to vote on. But it's important. If you're going to get paid to show up to do the work, you need to be able to have those tough debates out in the open. And that's all we're asking people to do, is to have that debate out in the open.
Would you say that this stoppage that we have, the fact that we've ground to a halt, is indicative of your leadership at all as president of the Senate?
Well, nobody ever wants to be self-reflective, but I will just say that in the 5 years that I've been in the Oregon State Senate, we've seen 5 walkouts, and the last time prior to COVID that we had Republicans in this exact same position with a different presiding officer, they walked out and they shut down government.
Nobody likes walkouts, of course. Measure 113 didn't work. The fines have not worked at this point. So what is next?
Well, I think it's too early to say necessarily that Measure 113 didn't work. I do think that you have a group of folks that aren't going to be able to file to run for re-election this year. They've made that decision to walk off the job knowing full well what the consequences that the voters put in place were. So I think, you know, sometimes it takes a little bit of time for these things to kind of work themselves out. I do think the next step, though, is that there are folks that want to see really good things happen for their communities with bills and budgets on education and housing and human services and transportation infrastructure. Those are the things that are before the legislature, and those are the things we need to be focusing on.
Do you see a deal being made here? What's your vision here? Do you realistically see it happening?
Yeah, I think there's the potential that that's really going to be where we end up, and I'm hopeful. I think the door is continually open. There's still conversations that are happening.
We talked about a lot today. Asked the senator about his feelings regarding Republicans getting paid right now. He said they voted this morning to issue fines for a second day to those who have walked out.
And when that walkout first started, Republicans cited process issues and concerns over how these bills are written. It's very clear this walkout is also issue-driven. I spoke to Senate Republican leader Tim Knopp about what it would take to come back.
Fifth week now, it's no closer to ending than it was at the beginning. What would it take for you and your colleagues to go back?
So lawful, bipartisan, and constitutional. I've said that over and over again. So we're taking it upon ourselves to try to help resolve this situation by rewriting all the bill summaries of bills that are still in the process. It's about 300 to 350 bills that are still in the process, that are still alive. And so we're doing that to try to help the Senate majority make this session a lawful session as it relates to following Senate rule and law.
Can you make that a little easier to understand for the average Oregonian who doesn't follow the legislative process, and a lot of this is kind of over their head? Yeah. They just want to know, can our elected leaders come together and find some common ground? How would you answer that question?
Well, so that's all we've been able and been trying to do is to find common ground and basically make a path toward bipartisanship. And it's the Senate Democrat leadership that has said, no, we want our bills our way, no amendments, and essentially no discussion. And we find that wholly unacceptable because some of the elements of those bills are unconstitutional pretty much on their face and violate the rights of parents to be able to care and love their children the way they want to. And there is no greater gift that a parent has than to be able to guide their child, and yet they don't want to allow that to happen. They would prefer the government step in.
Let's get into the issues then. In House Bill 2002, it seems the big sticking point is abortions for minors under 15 and no parental consent. Where would you be willing to compromise on that issue?
Well, so we've said those, if those bills are amended, that we are willing to essentially work with them, again, lawful, constitutional, and bipartisan. And so...
amended how?
By returning parental rights to healthcare issues for kids.
So unless House Bill 2002 is amended to read, anyone under 15 would need parental consent, the walkout will continue? Yeah,
so there's lots of ways to amend a bill. And what we've said is we're open to amendments. What the Democrats have said is they're not open to any amendments. And so the ones that are willing to be bipartisan and to give in this process is us. And they continue to be the ones that are uncompromising.
You believe then that is a compromise? If the current bill says 15 and under can have abortions, no parental access, where's the compromise in the middle? You want parents to have a say.
Yeah, so there's no question that's that's part of what we want in these bills. And again, all you have to do is try to work to find that bipartisan consensus that can exist. They're just choosing not to. And we are saying bipartisan is absolutely necessary.
Senator Wagner told us earlier today that you and other Republican leaders have not come to them with a specific list of compromises that you want. Is that a fair representation?
I don't think it really is. So, maybe he hasn't gotten that list, but we've said over and over again what we're interested in. I've talked with the governor. I've talked with, other leaders and Democrats about what we want. So I think that's probably a convenient excuse on his part.
A little bit later on in the show, we're going to have one of the Democratic co-sponsors of that abortion bill live on this show. Steve will talk to her about where they could compromise. Meanwhile, Senator Kotek says he is still meeting with Democrats to find common ground and find a way back into session. However, that does not include meeting with Rob Wagner. Kotek says the two of them have not met in 3 weeks.
Oregon only has long sessions every other year. This gives lawmakers the time to pass policy bills that don't happen in a short session, so a lot is at stake this year. KATU's Capitol reporter Christina Giardinelli has been tracking those policy bills for us. So she's live here now. Christina, Republican senators, they tell you they feel disenfranchised by the Democratic Party, right?
Yeah, a lot of them are saying they feel like the bipartisan bills that they sponsored didn't get a committee hearing just because they were sponsored by a Republican. In the meantime, you have Democrats saying that the minority party is holding this session hostage and, eschewing the will of the voters. This stack of blue folders piling up on the Senate floor represents bills that Democrats and Republicans worked hard to write. Oregon's longest walkout yet is stopping them from passing. Senators like Kim Thatcher, who are engaging in that protest, say it's the only way to make the majority party listen.
I think they just want to control it all and not include us.
She's been serving as a lawmaker since 2005 and says this is the most partisan session she's seen yet.
Never have I seen it be so divisive.
Senator David Brock Smith agrees.
Even though there was a slim margin of victory when it comes to the Democrats and the majority, they control every piece of this process.
Both senators say they've sponsored a host of bipartisan bills that Democrats never scheduled hearings for.
We're looking at all of the bills that I have chief sponsored or sponsored that have died.
His bills addressed issues like a lack of tech programs in rural areas or red tape that's stopping housing production. Republicans say this is part of what fueled the walkout, but controversial reproductive rights and gun control measures are stopping negotiations.
There seemed to be absolutely no interest in amending them to make them better.
Democrats say Republicans are the ones unwilling to compromise. Representative Jason Krupp is sponsoring a bill meant to improve early literacy outcomes.
It'll be frustrating to a lot of people if this bill isn't able to pass because 10 people aren't showing up.
Senator Floyd Prosansky chairs the Senate Committee on Judiciary with a number of public safety bills in limbo, like Senate Bill 318 tackling retail theft.
What we found at the retail levels, there's been a lot of theft, and unfortunately, some massive organized critical theft.
He says he did not deny his co-chair Thatcher hearings because of her party.
Try to accommodate. Our committee, the Judiciary Committee, has the most bills filed.
Now, with 19 days left in the session, it remains to be seen whether or not this session can get back into a session, and both parties say they hope negotiations will work. Live in Salem, Christina Giardinelli, KATU News.
Christina, thank you. Well, coming up after the break, we'll continue our deep dive into the GOP walkout. How do voters in the counties represented by absent senators feel about their lawmakers' actions? We took a trip today to find out, and we'll hear what they have to say in just minutes.
Welcome back as we continue our coverage of the Senate walkout live here in Salem. In just a few minutes, we'll hear how Oregon stacks up to the rest of the country and take a look at the similarities to the recent debt ceiling standoff in Washington, D.C. But first,
I believe it's the only way that their voices can be heard. They're a minority, so it's the only way that they can be heard because otherwise they don't have a say.
Continuing our coverage now, conservative voters in Canby expressing mixed feelings about that stalemate in Salem we've been talking about all day. They believe if the GOP lawmakers' voices aren't being heard, the voters aren't either. KATU's Ricardo Lewis is live in Canby now with more on this story. Ricardo, what did you learn today?
Well, conservative voters here in Canby say that they haven't really been following this walkout, but they say that they do support it, and they support it because they say they want to protect their freedoms. However, I did speak with one man who is also a conservative who says lawmakers should get back to work. On a warm day in downtown Canby, Jake and Chrissy Fish soaked in the sun while having a bite to eat for lunch at the local coffee shop. But on their minds is what's happening at the state capitol.
Grew up here. I've lived 6 miles from here my entire life, and it's a great place to live, but it's kind of scary what they're doing to it.
She's referring to policies Democratic lawmakers are pushing for. They're conservatives standing in support with the GOP senators that walked out more than a month ago in protest against bills on abortion rights, gender-affirming care, and gun safety.
I support it because I believe that the things that they are trying to protect is a big deal.
They believe without the walkout, conservative voices will be silenced every time.
There needs to be a common ground, some sort of, nonpartisan ground that they can talk on and discuss things to figure out how to move forward.
I'm generally more conservative.
Chuck Hartman is also a conservative, but he's against the walkout.
I think they should get back to work, do the job they were elected for. Even if things don't go the way they want it to go or I want it to go.
He says this is the way government works.
If they don't want those things going through, they should convince more people of their point of view and get more people elected.
I think that sometimes if you have an issue that's so important and you believe in that issue so much, then you have to fall on the sword.
Now, I asked voters if they believe lawmakers can meet in the middle on this, and they say that's going to be a hard thing to do here in Oregon. I was also told that there have been some Canby families that are either considering or have already moved to other conservative states like Texas and Florida. We're live in Canby. Ricardo Lewis, KATU News.
Ricardo, thank you so much for that. So both sides feel supported in their positions and may not feel significant pressure to compromise. But Deb, you found out how that kind of pressure can make all the difference in a stalemate like this.
Right, I did. While Salem has been stuck in this standoff between Republicans and Democrats, we saw true bipartisan compromise over a tough issue in Washington, D.C. The Biden administration and House Republicans struck a deal to raise the debt ceiling, a deal that passed both chambers of Congress. I spoke with Sinclair's national political correspondent in D.C., Scott Thuman, about what motivated the two sides to actually come together. What was the key to breaking the stalemate between the White House and House Republicans over the debt ceiling?
Yeah, pending catastrophe, and then the urgency that came with it. This was one of those scenarios where both sides were already taking a lot of incoming fire. They were both being blamed for how the scenario was playing out. And so they felt a need to actually come together for that rare bipartisanship and solve the problem by raising the debt ceiling. And in return, Republicans got to have some leverage over how the budget is going to be approved in the fall. And that's the sort of motivation, unfortunately, that it takes here in Washington for a lot of issues is that blame can go any way you want it. But when both sides start suffering from it, they feel a need to act. And that's what happened here. Although, to critics' point, it came very, very late, dangerously so.
So we want to bring in Chris Shortell now, political science professor at Portland State University, to talk about this standoff in Salem. Thanks for being with us today, Chris.
Of course.
Okay, so we just heard from our political reporter in D.C. about the pressure on both sides pushing them towards the compromise in regards to the debt ceiling. Republicans and Democrats in Salem don't seem to be feeling any of that pressure to resolve their stalemate. Why is that?
I mean, the stakes aren't quite as high if you think about the debt limit and the debt ceiling crisis that was potentially a global economic problem. Oregon isn't facing quite that, and I think there's still a little bit of time left in the session. I think one big concern is going to be about the budget and what happens with the budget. Because they're going to have another chance to pass a budget a little bit later, that pressure hasn't ramped up yet.
This is almost becoming the new norm with these walkouts happening over the last few years. Is the political dysfunction in Oregon unique?
There are some aspects of it that are unique. Oregon is one state that is continuing to have walkouts, though we've seen walkouts in other state legislatures in previous years, and we see some issues arising in other state legislatures right now as well.
So do states where political power is more evenly divided between the parties have fewer of these types of problems?
They can, but not necessarily. Sometimes when that power is more evenly divided, then the minority party can enact its preferences a little bit less visibly through negotiations. But sometimes if it's so closely divided, it just takes a couple people to throw some kinks in the works.
How much of an influence does national politics have on what's happening in Oregon and our divide?
It definitely has an impact. I mean, we're seeing polarization happen across the board. We're seeing it happen nationally, and we see it happening in Oregon. So appeals to the past and bipartisanship that might have occurred in Oregon in the past are shaped by the fact that polarization is a reality across the country, and that includes in Oregon.
So, Chris, Oregon voters did pass Measure 113 last year to stop the walkouts. Republicans believe they may have found a loophole in this measure so they can run again for office in their next term, even with 10 unexcused absences. What do you think about their loophole argument?
I think it's hard to say. I mean, there's something to the argument, but there's also something to the argument from the Secretary of State. And I think it's really difficult to predict exactly how a court is going to handle those claims. Nonetheless, 68% of voters did communicate in Measure 113 that they really were not in favor of this kind of behavior by legislators.
Chris Shortell, thank you for your time tonight.
You're welcome.
All right, we're going to take you back to the Capitol coming up in just a few minutes as we continue our team coverage of the Senate stalemate. More from Steve Dunn and the team at 6:30. Coming up later in the newscast, we have some of the other top stories from the day, including the latest on the suspect accused of starting a 4-alarm fire at a downtown Portland apartment.
And yes, another sizzling day here in the Rose City. So when do things begin to cool down? And is there any rain in the forecast? You'll see in the 7-day coming right up.
Weather Window, presented by the National Weather Desk.
Smoke from Canadian wildfires is still pouring into U.S. skies, creating unhealthy air in many northeastern cities. But the smoke continues to intensify dramatic sunsets and sunrises in many parts of the country. And sunrise along the Florida coast reveals sea turtle tracks ending at the shoreline.
Listen to Off the Radar, new episodes every Tuesday. Find it wherever you get your podcasts.
Let's check out our local weather forecast. Hot day across the area today, and it looks like we're going to get another one tomorrow.
Yeah, I think today is the hottest day of the week, but only slightly cooler for tomorrow. So we'll see daytime highs tomorrow. Instead of being low to mid 90s, we're talking upper 80s to low 90s. Again, 90-degree days so far. You count today. We've got 6 of them in the calendar for the year 2023. The record set back in 2018. What's interesting about this is the average for all 12 months is about 13 days a year, and as of today, we're almost halfway there, and I think tomorrow very likely could see 90 degrees again on the thermometer. Now out there this hour, fair skies across the area, holding right at 90. Northwest winds down about 9 miles an hour and still very low humidity at just 23%. Here are the highs today across the area. Hit 92 out at PDX, cross the bridge over in Vancouver, 91. Same thing for Troutdale, 92 for Hillsborough. Beaverton, 94. Sherwood today, 95 degrees. Estacada, you were 90. And down in the Willamette Valley, there you have Kaiser at 90. McMinnville, 89. And Salem this afternoon at 91 degrees. So here's the hour-by-hour forecast. And again, for tomorrow, hot temperatures back in the forecast. Still have this area of low pressure right down here off California, pushing moisture north. So again, combine that moisture coming up out of California with some very warm temperatures. A chance again tomorrow of seeing some scattered thunderstorms over parts of central and eastern Oregon, not in the Willamette Valley, but again, still quite warm. Temperatures tomorrow maybe down 2 or 3 degrees from today, so we're talking upper 80s to low 90s. Let's go into Wednesday afternoon. A few increasing clouds in the afternoon. Notice the wind pattern here, a little bit more of an onshore flow moving on in, so I think by tomorrow evening we begin to cool down across the area. We get in towards Thursday. Southwesterly flow there, maybe some morning clouds, some afternoon sunshine. By Thursday, highs will be upper 70s to low 80s, and by Friday, more cloud cover, cooler air arrives, and by Friday, temperatures will be tamped down into the 70s, mid to upper 70s for daytime highs, but again, still dry skies across the region. So for tomorrow, if you're west side of the Cascades, here you go, partly cloudy skies, 88 tomorrow for Kelso, 90 in Hood River, 87 for Salem, and 68 in the coast at Tillamook, and 65 in Lincoln City. East side of the Cascades, sunny skies, isolated thunderstorms, again, likely, especially in central and southeastern Oregon. 93 for Pendleton, 95 tomorrow for the Dalles. Madras will be at 90, and north winds 5 to 15 miles an hour. 7-day forecast, so tomorrow, 89. 83 on Thursday, into the 70s on Friday, and through the weekend. Good news here is Saturday, of course, the Rose Festival Grand Floral Parade. Dry skies and temperatures in the 70s. That'll be nice. Back into the 80s on Sunday and Monday of next week. And the dry pattern continues for at least the next 7 days, Deb.
Okay, Dave, thank you. Coming up after the break, we'll head back out to Salem for our continuing coverage of day 22 of the Senate walkout. We'll hear how much support Republicans actually have for the walkout.
Welcome back to our live coverage in Salem tonight as we get answers from the power players about the walkout now in its 22nd day. How much support do the Republicans actually have for this walkout?
At the moment, we don't have specific data on support or opposition for this walkout. However, I spoke with Michelle Neese, president of DHM Research, a local independent research firm, to find out generally where Republicans may see support. Michelle, thanks for taking time to speak with us.
Absolutely. Thank you for having me.
In this session and previous legislative sessions, when Republicans walk out, they feel like they have support from the people who elected them to walk out. Where does that support come from, and who are they?
I think it's important to remember that when you look at the last governor's race, Kotek won 7 counties, right? And so, yes, she won the state. Those are very populous counties. But the rest of the state, the majority of the state, elected the Republican candidate in those counties. So you see just a map of Oregon would be a sea of red. And so absolutely, those legislators, when they're back in their home district, they're going to be hearing from their supporters who have priorities that are in line with the actions that the Republicans are taking.
How about the broader public opinion of walkouts? Are they, on the whole, popular or unpopular? What does the data show?
So the last time we polled on this, which was back in 21, just over half of people opposed the walkouts. That said, Republicans tended to support them at a higher rate. And so again, the Republican legislators are hearing support from their constituents over this tactic of trying to get their voices heard and get some meaningful action on their priorities.
Are the walkouts, are they issue specific? I mean, could someone theoretically oppose the walkout, but then when it's about an issue they care about, support a walkout in a given situation?
Absolutely. I think it's important to realize it's probably support for walkouts isn't a Democrat or Republican issue, right? So when Democrats were walking out, probably support for walkouts was higher among Democrats. And now Republican voters, they don't so much care about the process. They care about the issue. And so again, when it's about issues they care about, voters are going to be more supportive because they do want to see that their legislators, their electeds are fighting for those priorities.
Michelle, thank you for taking time to speak with us.
Absolutely.
We sent our crew out to Portlanders to find out how they felt about the walkout or if they even knew what it was about. And we got some mixed responses. Some knew what was happening. Others were just finding out, but many agreed that it was an important issue. Take a listen.
Yeah, I definitely think it affects me personally because it's going to affect me, my family, my kids. It's going to make a big impact to not only us but our community around us. So obviously it's going to affect each one of us personally.
As a woman and someone who really values my rights as, you know, to make choices that involve me, and if I ever have kids, then absolutely I think this affects me and, you know, my friends and all that, because I personally know people that have, you know, needed abortions, and it's a woman's right to decide whether, you know, that's something she wants or not.
Let's get back out to Salem, where Steve spoke with some past legislators about the issues today.
We did, Deb. Thank you for that. I talked with the former president of the Oregon Senate, Peter Courtney, this morning about this walkout. As Senate president for 20 years, he knows a lot about the workings of the Oregon legislature in that building behind me. I asked him why he thinks it's important for Oregonians to understand what the legislature does and why this walkout really does affect them.
I think if you walked out on the street right now and asked people about the walkout, a lot of people just wouldn't care.
I think that's right.
But why? Tell them why they should care, though.
Oh, well, this is the branch of government that represents you the most. I'm telling you. I said local government is the nearest form of government people, and it is because of all the ordinances they pass. But when you think of all the things that govern your behavior sitting here, driving, all the things on a 24-hour basis that govern your behavior, those laws were created by a legislature. When you think of the budget of the state of Oregon, which allows it to keep itself a dynamic society, it's the legislature. And if your legislature isn't producing, look out. You can have a weak judiciary, not good. You can have a weak even executive, because then your agency heads will sort of pick it up. They shouldn't, but that's what they'll do. Your legislature, you get one rep and one senator to represent you, everybody in the state. That body, I cannot tell you, I've said it before, if you check the Constitution, Steve, the first article that describes a branch of government is the legislature. It's Article 4. The other two come later. Now, why is that? Very simply because I think that's how important the forefathers, foremothers thought it was, both at the federal and the state level. You've got to have great legislators. You've got to have, I know everybody wants to run statewide. Go ahead and run. But if your legislature isn't sharp, isn't on the ball, isn't doing its job, you will do more to hurt the individual citizen, I think, than a governor or a court. And that's why you should be very concerned about it. Very concerned about where your state rep and state senator are, how they're doing this, how they see this, what role they're playing in this. And they should have to comment one way or the other.
Peter certainly has been there on the front lines for years now. I also talked to the former Republican leader of the Oregon Senate, Herman Bertschiger. He left the Senate a couple of years ago. Bertschiger took part in past Republican walkouts, though they were much shorter than the one currently taking place. I asked him in an interview last week for his perspective. Here's that.
Do you have any concerns, Herman, about the effect that walkouts are having on the legislative process when it comes to passing bills there?
Yes, I do. I think the reason you're seeing this is because the art of compromise is, in my opinion, gone. You know, I've seen it start to diminish in the Senate. When I was there, I would say somewhere around 2017, maybe 2018. And it saddens me that, you know, we can't come to a point of reconciling our differences without having to take these drastic measures.
Do you see any downside to the Senate walkout taking place right now?
Oh, a big downside. As much as President Courtney and I seen differences on different issues, we were lockstep in the institution of the Oregon Senate, how it's supposed to function, and right now it's not functioning. And I think during the walkout when I was there, that concerned me. I know it concerned President Courtney, but we've always been lockstep in the institution and how it's supposed to function. And when you have to go to these extreme measures, it's no longer functioning as it should. And it's because people can't sit down and compromise.
And along with some of those recorded interviews, we just heard from former Senate leaders. And joining us now is State Senator Elizabeth Steiner, a Democrat who represents Northwest Portland and parts of Beaverton, as a matter of fact, as well. She's co-chair of the Ways and Means Committee. Let's talk about this because Senator Knopp says they want parental consent required for abortions for minors under the age of 15. You're a co-sponsor of that bill. Is that a reasonable request?
No, it's not. Unfortunately, we know that some young children don't have parents who are safe. We know that some young people are, in fact, raped by family members, and we need to protect those children. Now, that being said, the vast majority of the time, over 90% of the time, any minor who's having an abortion has their parents involved. And the only time they don't is if it would endanger the child.
What's it like for you, being a senator in that building back there, as this walkout goes on? Now we're 22 days in.
It's incredibly frustrating, Steve. We are doing amazing work on behalf of Oregonians across the entire state, passing really good budgets that will impact, for example, our K-12 system, a record investment in education that won't pass unless they come back. Investments in droughts, investments in housing, investment in things that Oregonians across the state care about deeply. And we can't do that work unless they come back and allow us the time to have the public process to pass those bills on the floor of the Senate.
Your best guess at this point, when will this end? Will we get through the session and have a resolution? What are your thoughts?
Well, I certainly hope so. We have ongoing conversations. Many of us are having individual conversations with Republicans that we have personal relationships with. Most of us do. And that's really important to have those conversations. And I really hope that we can find a resolution that allows them to come back and do their constitutional duty and make sure that our democracy functions in the way that Oregonians expect. They are subverting the will of Oregonians by walking out. This is essentially a minority veto. They need to come back and work with us, stand up, make their voices heard on the floor of the Senate, but don't walk away.
Democrat Senator Elizabeth Snyder, thank you for your time today.
My pleasure.
Thanks for stopping by. I want you to know as well, folks at home, we did reach out to Republican senators and asked them to come out here as well, but they were not available to do that. Let's go back to you in the studio, Deb, for now. We'll be back a little bit later.
Okay, Steve, thank you. Coming up after the break, we take a look at some of the other top stories from today. Plus, the end of a bitter golf rivalry. The PGA Tour and Live Golf are merging to create a commercial operation. What's next for the tour?
And sunny skies, daytime highs once again back up into the 90s. So is there any sign of cooling or wetter weather anytime soon? I have all the forecasts coming right up.